speaker is Professor Daphna, who's a professor at the Tel Aviv University Faculty of Law right here, and also at the Women and Gender Studies program in the university. And the talk today is on divorced Israeli men's abuse of transnational human rights laws.
Thank you all for coming, and I think it's very interesting to think about the connection between our two presentations. I think it's part of the same phenomena of a backlash against liberalism. So my paper was published at the Canadian Journal of Women and the Law as part of a whole conference on men's groups in different countries. So I'm going to focus about the Israeli rise of men's groups. These are anti-feminist groups. There is, I think, one organization called ASLI that we can think of as a feminist men's group, but most groups of men are part of the phenomena that I'm going to talk about. So we have, when I wrote my PhD, 20 years ago, there was a small section about men's groups, and I said, oh, they're marginalized, everybody thinks they're crazy, nobody listens to them. They tried to run to the parliament and they failed, they're never invited to the Knesset. And in the last 10 years, there is a complete turning in their legitimacy. And they are becoming a player very much like what you described, that no discussion in the Israeli parliament about the family is held without them. And just to give you an anecdote, in one of the meetings that I was part of about child custody, which is one of the heated debates within Israeli public and legal debate now, one of them sat and during the discussion sent a WhatsApp message to one of the parliament member with a gun, a picture of a gun. And she said, oh my God, you just sent me a picture of a gun, but nobody thought that that person should be immediately removed from the room and that he should never be allowed in the parliament again. This is how strong they are, regardless the ways they are conducting themselves. And in this list we see that most of their action is legitimate, in the sense it's legal, this is how NGOs are working, and they're citing my work in the Knesset saying Professor Harker says that we are very effective. But I've highlighted two strategies which I think are not legitimate and which pose a problem, going back to the liberal side of how do we deal with NGOs that lie deliberately and that use threats as part of their strategy. So there's just a few examples of what they're doing. The virtual sphere is their main platform. Again, a new technology that allows them to I think, be effective in a way that wasn't available 20 years ago. You can see me, for example, in two of the pictures. I'll let you guess where I am. But just, another anecdote. Yesterday I got an email from a lawyer, 3-page letter, very formal, about the discrimination of men within the gender studies program that I'm heading. So this is another way of keeping, harassing constantly feminist organizations, feminist platforms. They're changing, for example, I have a Wikipedia thing, entry, so they're changing the details. And when I became a professor, they objected for the update of, really constantly harassing individuals. I have tenure, so when they wrote to my rector that I should be fired, I wasn't that upset. But some of the people are part of the private sector, psychologists, social workers, mediators, and when those guys are targeting them, that's becoming, an issue. So if today I want to organize a conference in which a psychologist will talk about the attachment theory, I won't be able to find one, because this is how effective they are, how they're terrorizing the public and academic sphere. So I'm going to focus about what they're doing in the transnational and international spheres. The Israeli movement is part of a global movement, and we see that within the global north, one country after the other has abolished the 10-year doctrine that grants custody to mothers, minimizing the duty of father to support their children, restricting the ability of the custodian parent to relocate internally and externally, the new wave of parental alienation discourse in which mothers are accused of alienating the children from their fathers, a rhetoric, and there is a conference in Oranim College in a few days with this message, men are abused in families as women, women are as violent in their families as men, and this is happening in one of the Israeli colleges. A whole report was just published a few months ago in one of the, again, pseudo-academic institution, Kohelet Forum. It looks like an academic report. It is written by a member of the UNO College, but it all falls in the sense that it cites articles and facts about how women complain forcefully about sexual assaults, about violence in the families, and it takes a very rigorous investigation into the footnotes, into the citations, to realize that this is, a very problematic report on the academic level. And the general claim, feminism is ruining society, ruining the family. We should all go back to family values. We don't know anymore what a man is, what a woman is. And this picture here is the latest way of their protest. They use customs as if they are Daesh. How do you say Daesh in English? ISIS victims. This is how terrible divorced men are being treated by the Israeli legal system. The innovative strategies that are used, as far as we know, only by Israeli men's groups, is not being settled only for the local and national sphere, but moving beyond to the transnational and the international legal spheres. So Israeli men's groups have approached the UN with their complaints and have litigated in the US under laws aimed to protect victims of torture, again to harass and threaten judges, social workers, etc. And I will say a few words about each of these strategies. So again they are approaching the UN with, again, reports. No citations, no footnotes, no deep academic work, but this is a shadow report, and the UN is open to shadow reports by NGOs. And I'm going to focus on the most successful attempt they have made to make the UN issue a statement against Israeli judges and social workers. So in 2011, a coalition of 8 Israeli men's organizations submit a report with false facts. So I'm just writing with 2 of my colleagues a paper on fake news in family law. So this is the beginning of fake news in our sphere, and you can see from the quotes and from the facts. So I'm gonna just highlight one of the facts. 200 Israeli men commit suicide each year because of their discrimination in divorce procedures. So this number, 200, is promoted again and again. Just last week there was Granit, what's her name? Sofit Gran, thank you. Program on parental alienation, and one of the interviewees says 150 Israeli men commit suicide each year because of parental alienation. And believe me, I've been, I don't know how many years, I'm saying I went to the Ministry of Health, I extracted the data, and analyzed it. Only 35 divorced men commit suicide every year on average in Israel. And just last year, the Ministry of Health itself conducted the analysis of how many of them are parents of minor children, 15. So Emil Durkheim was the first to say that men commit more suicide successfully than women, but this number pops up again and again, and here it's in a formal report by a coalition of NGOs to the UN. The UN committee was quick to be impressed and issued an official response saying to Israel, oh, please don't make it so hard on divorced fathers. They might be paying too much child support. You should be nicer to divorced fathers. So this is one example of what we already have this academic discussion about the problematic attitude of the UN regarding shadow reports and the inability of the UN to really investigate the facts and know to distinguish between fake news and other news. The US angle of their battle is really interested. Between 2010 and 2016, they submitted what looks like an individual case by individual Israeli divorced father, but in fact they look so similar. So it's very clear they're organized and they're assisted by the same lawyers, although they're not presented by a lawyer in the hearings in the States. And here we see cases against governmental ministries, social workers, judges. For example, one of my colleagues here, Professor Daphna was nominated to the Supreme Court. I gave her a call. Daphna, you know there's a lawsuit against you for $20 million in the state, and she thought she's going to faint. So she was one of those that were approached by these litigations. So what they're doing is using the invitation of the US issued for foreigners to submit cases against their governments for severe human rights violation. And again, this is pre the non-Cobbler decision, and really harassing judges and social workers and the state of Israel with these false accusations and ridiculous claims. So, for example, there is an Israeli institutionalized discriminatory policy of disengaging and separating fathers from their minor children, resulting in physical and mental torture of fathers. Okay, this is what their cases are saying. Constitute crimes against humanity. I mean, the language of transnational human rights law, violation of civil and human rights, torture, blah, blah, blah. Against false statistics, the suicide rate of divorced fathers in Israel is 1 in 72. You know. Israeli divorced fathers are 3 times more likely to die from defended social welfare strategies than from terrorist attacks. Oh gosh, etc., etc. And this is for millions of dollars. On average, it takes 1.5 years to dismiss these cases. And here is the picture of the lawyers' building in Washington, D.C. that represents the state of Israel, that gives defense for these defendants. It's the same office that protects Israeli military officers that are accused of crimes in the occupied territories. So all of us Israeli taxpayers are paying this office a lot of money to defend and defeat these cases. It terrorizes the defendant themselves. Some of them are funds that support Israel, and one of their CEOs gave a talk in Tel Aviv University saying how much energy and time and money is spent on these cases. I think it harms the US legal system that has to deal with these cases and maybe makes it reluctant to deal with true cases of torture and human rights violations. So of course it harms the victims of such human rights violations. It harms women and children in Israel because it's part of this movement of weakening women within divorce negotiations. In another paper I'm working on, I'm arguing for the death of motherhood within Israeli law. What used to be the basis for recognition, so we can't be in the public sphere as men, we can't be politicians, we can't make a lot of money, but at least we had, this was the notion of a lot of sociologists in Israel, at least we have the motherhood, because Israeli women have 3 children on average, unlike Italy and Spain and other countries. So we perform our motherhood duty like no other, and thinking this will guarantee our citizenship. So even this basis is fading, and the legal arena is I'm heading from here to a conference at the lawyers' bar on a Supreme Court decision saying that the rabbinical court decision that if a woman had a new boyfriend after 30 years of marriage and her marriage has just collapsed, this is a reason to take some of her property right. So this is what we are dealing with in family law in Israel. So this is above everything else, using transnational and international law to weaken women's position within divorce procedures. Whether Israeli men's groups are inspiring other men's groups and they will start to approach the UN and the US, I don't really know. I know that the Ministry of Justice became really concerned about these cases and approached the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And I tried to learn what happened since 2016. I don't know. I think there were a lot of pressure, diplomatic pressure, not only legal pressure, on the US authorities to make this thing stop. So on a more concrete level, there is a question of how do we produce transnational law that is responsible, realizing that it can be abused by these misogynist groups and other anti-liberal groups. Of course, from a feminist perspective, we wouldn't want to trash transnational law altogether, but this is a warning sign to countries that invite foreign citizens to sue on their land, how complex and sensitive and embedded in power relations these dynamics can be. I think on a more broad level, this is a new era in which human rights organizations have to find new ways. How do you act in the era of fake news? How do you act in the era of abuse of the law? How do you respond to the hijacking of human rights discourse? So these groups are talking about gender equality. The letter I got yesterday was about gender equality. They're talking the language of human rights. So this is a huge challenge. And the fourth challenge is funding. These guys have funds that feminist organizations do not. Again, because most of the global wealth is in men's hands. So it's a new phase of the struggle and a very challenging one. Thank you.